The forest always sounded different after midnight. Not louder, not dangerous at first. Just wrong. I remember sitting beside the dying campfire somewhere deep in the mountains, wrapped in 3 blankets, while cold fog drifted slowly between the trees like pale smoke. My flashlight rested beside my boot, flickering every few seconds because the batteries were almost dead. The only sound was the softest of burning pine wood and the distant creaking of branches swaying in the dark. My friend Ethan had already gone to sleep inside the tent behind me, but I couldn't. Something kept pulling my attention toward the tree line. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion. We'd spent the entire day hiking through old logging trails far away from the nearest road. No signal, no cabins, no other campers. Just miles of silent forest folding endlessly into the mountains. Then I heard it, a single heavy footstep. Not close, but large, slow, deliberate. I remember holding my breath as the sound came again from somewhere beyond the fog. The fire cracked softly beside me while the darkness between the trees seemed to shift ever so slightly. That's when I noticed something standing impossibly still behind Cedar Tree. Tall, covered in dark hair, watching our campsite without moving at all. And somehow, I knew it had been there for a very long time. That was the first night I understood why some forests never feel empty. The lake was still when I arrived. Late evening light spread thin over the water, pale and tired, like it had been drained of warmth. Pine trees stood around me in heavy silence, their needles dark and damp, smelling of old rain and cold earth. I set my tent near the shore, where the ground was flat, soft soil under my boots, a faint crunch of frost hiding beneath leaves. The fire took time to build, which snapped reluctantly. Smoke rose slow and gray, drifting into the trees as if it didn't want to leave me alone. By the time the flames settled, the forest had already grown darker than it should have been. Too quiet, not peaceful, just emptied. I sat close to the fire, heat brushing my face while my back stayed cold. The lake reflected everything in broken pieces. Firelight, trees, my shadow shifting slightly when I didn't move. Then I heard the first step. Somewhere behind me, dry leaves pressing down. Slow, careful. I turned my head. Nothing there. Only trees standing too close together. Trunks swallowing the light before it could reach them. The fire crackled again. A small, comforting noise. Almost enough to convince me it was nothing. But the steps came back. Not rushing. Not leaving. Just circling. Around the edge of my campsite. I stayed still, watching the fire instead of the forest. Like if I didn't acknowledge it, it would forget me. The flames dipped suddenly. Windless. No reason. And in that dimming light, something shifted between the trees. Tall, not fully formed. Just presence. A shape that looked wrong beside the trunks. Like it didn't belong to the same rules of height or balance. When the fire brightened again, it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of light. Tired eyes. Deep forest silence playing games. But the steps continued. Always just outside the firelight. Always matching the edge where vision broke apart. Then came the whistle. Low. Distant. It moved through the trees like it was carried on air that shouldn't exist. There was no wind. Not even the smallest breath against the branches. Still, the sound traveled. Long, thin. Almost gentle. It didn't feel like warning. It felt like recognition. The fire flickered again. And in that flicker, I saw more movement. Not one shape now. Several. Between trunks. Behind trunks. Above the slope where darkness should have been empty. Each time I looked directly, there was nothing. But in the space between blinks, they were there. Watching without eyes I could understand. My hands stayed close to the fire. Close enough that the heat hurt slightly. I didn't move them away. The whistle came again. Closer this time. Not from one direction. From all of them. As if the forest itself had learned how to breathe through a single narrow sound. I stood up without thinking. The fire stretched my shadow behind me, long and unstable, bending wrong across the ground. And then I noticed a circle. Footsteps pressed into the soil around my tent. Not random, not scattered. Perfect arc measured distance. Repeating pattern like something had walked it many times before me. But the ground was soft, fresh, Only mine should have been there. The fire dipped again, and this time I didn't miss it. A figure stood between two pine trees, not moving, not shifting, too tall for the space it occupied, like the forest had widened just to hold it. No face I could see, only a darker absence against the dark. The whistle stopped. Everything stopped. Even the fire seemed unsure whether to continue burning. I blinked once. It was gone. Only trees remained, dripping with cold silence and heavy shadow. I sat back down slowly, carefully. Like sudden movement might invite attention I couldn't undo. The night deepened after that. No more whistle. No more steps. Just silence stretching wider than the lake itself. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed from distances I couldn't measure. At some point, I must have drifted into shallow sleep. Not rest, just slipping out of awareness, like falling beneath cold water. When I woke, the fire was ash, gray, cold, dead, without resistance. Morning light barely reached the ground through the trees. Everything looked unchanged until I saw the edge of the camp. The footprints were still there, surrounding everything, large impressions in the soil, pressed deep enough to hold shadow inside them. No clear direction of arrival, no clear direction of leaving, just presence all around me. I stood very still, listening to the morning forest. But even now, it felt like something had not fully gone, like it had only stepped back into the trees, waiting for the firelight to return again. The logging path was older than the map made it seem. We stepped onto it just after noon. Two hikers, backpacks heavy, air thin with the smell of dry pine and old wood dust. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. Birds first, gone, then insects. Then even the wind felt like it had lost its way. Our boots pressed into soft earth, each step sinking with a damp, hollow sound. And then it began, a snap behind us. A branch breaking clean, sharp, like something stepping exactly where I had stepped. We stopped, looked back. Nothing moved, only trees leaning slightly, as if listening. We kept walking, but the snapping followed again. Not random, not distant, perfectly timed. Every step I took, something mirrored behind us. My friend noticed it too. I saw it in his shoulders first. The stiffness, the silence growing between us. We didn't speak much after that. The forest had started answering instead. By late afternoon, we found the stones. Small piles at first. 3 rocks stacked carefully beside the trail. Then more. Some balanced in impossible ways. Like hands had placed them with patience that didn't belong in a place like this. We didn't touch them. But I remember feeling watched while standing near them. Not from one direction, from all around. That night, we set up camp early. The sky turned pale too fast, like daylight was being pulled away. Our tent sat in a clearing that felt too open for something so closed in. We barely spoke as darkness settled. Only the sound of fabric shifting in cold air. Then the breathing started. Outside the tent. Slow. Heavy. Circling. Not close enough to touch, but never leaving. It moved around us like something learning the shape of our fear. I held my breath without realizing it. Every time I thought it was gone, it returned from another angle. Closer, lower, almost pressed against the thin wall between us and the forest. My friend whispered once, just one word. I didn't answer, because the breathing stopped at the same moment he spoke, like it was listening. The silence afterward was worse, too complete, as if the forest itself had leaned in. We didn't sleep, not really, just sat there, backs against packs, waiting for morning to justify survival. When light finally came, the tent was still intact, but the trail outside was changed. The snapping branches had stopped, and in their place was something worse. Stillness that felt intentional, like whatever followed us had decided we were not worth chasing anymore, only observing. I found the river by accident. The trail just opened into it. Wide water moving slow and black under fading light. Pines bending close as if trying to see their reflection. And beside it, a campsite, already prepared. Fire pit freshly arranged. Ash still warm enough to smell. But no people, no footprints leading in, no signs of leaving. Just presence without explanation. I should have turned back. Instead, I stayed. The air felt wrong in a quiet way, like something had been recently removed from it. That night, I built a small fire near the edge of sight. The river carried the light in broken pieces, half reflections drifting away into darkness. Then I heard laughter, children's laughter, soft, far, coming from across the water. I stood up slowly. The opposite shore was too dark to define, just a wall of trees and wet shadow. But the laughter continued, not playful anymore, empty in a way that didn't belong to memory. It echoed across the water, stretching too long before fading. I told myself it was wind, some trick of distance, but there was no wind, not even movement in the reeds. Later, I found the handprints, in the mud near the riverbank, massive, pressed deep, fingers stretched too far apart, as if the hand had belonged to something that didn't understand human shape. The mud around them was still wet, fresh, but there were no tracks leading to or from them, only the prints themselves appearing like they had always been there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat facing the river, watching the opposite shore, waiting for something to step out of it. It never did, but I could feel it there, not moving, not leaving, just watching in return. The fog arrived without warning. One moment the forest was visible. The next it was swallowed, thick white silence between trees, damp air pressing against skin like a cold hand. We were already at the campground when it rolled in. 3 tents, small fire, weak light struggling against the fog's weight. Then the whistling began, first from one direction, then another answering it, then another still, like the forest had become a conversation we were never meant to understand. It wasn't music. It wasn't wind. It felt intentional. Each whistle waited for a response before moving closer. Hour by hour, the sound approached. Slow, patient. We stopped speaking altogether. Even breathing felt too loud. At some point, I saw a movement near the bathrooms. A silhouette, tall, thin in outline, disappearing the moment I focused on it, like the fog refused to hold it in place. No one else admitted seeing it, but I know I wasn't the only one, because after that, nobody looked directly at the trees again. Later that night, I woke to silence, not the absence of sound, the removal of it. I stepped outside the tent. The fog clung to everything, cold and heavy, and beside my sleeping bag, footprints, fresh, pressing into the soft ground as if something had stood there just moments before I opened my eyes. Too large, too deep. The forest beyond them was still, but it no longer felt empty. The ranger didn't look at us when he spoke, just stared past the counter, past the windows, into something we couldn't see. "Don't hike after sunset," he said. His voice was flat. Not fear. Something older. We asked why. He didn't answer, just repeated the warning, like repetition could replace explanation. We left anyway. The trail he mentioned was narrow, forgotten. An animal path climbing into higher ground where the trees grew tighter, older, wrong in shape. At first, it felt normal. Then the forest changed. Branches twisted in unnatural directions. Roots lifted like ribs beneath the soil. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the land was rearranging itself around us. Then came the smell. Foul, heavy, like wet stone left too long in darkness. We stopped, looked around, and realized the trees were no longer still. They were leaning, slightly, imperceptibly, as if something massive was moving between them, just out of sight. Then the footsteps started. Behind us, slow, crushing, not matching ours, not copying, approaching. We didn't run at first. We just listened, frozen in place while the sound grew heavier, closer, undeniable. And then we ran. No words, no plan, just downhill, through roots and fog and breaking branches. The forest didn't stop us. It only watched us leave. And even long after the trail ended, I could still feel behind us, not chasing anymore, just remembering where we had been. The storm arrived like something breaking through skin. No warning, no slow build, just sudden thunder rolling over the mountain, shaking the forest until even the trees felt uncertain of standing. I was alone when it began, My tent sat low near a narrow ridge, fabric already trembling under the first wave of wind. Rain followed instantly. Hard, heavy, endless. It struck the ground like thousands of small, impatient hands. Inside the tent, everything tightened. The air felt smaller with every minute. Then the footsteps came, slow, circling, just outside the thin wall of fabric that separated me from everything else. I stopped breathing without meaning to, listening instead. Each step pressed into wet soil, heavy enough to sink but controlled enough to stay steady. Not random, not wandering, watching. The storm should have drowned it out, but it didn't. The footsteps stayed clear, moving in a perfect loop around me. Again and again, lightning flashed once. And in that white moment, I saw it. A shadow stretched across the tent wall. Too tall, too thin in the wrong places. It didn't move like something walking. It moved like something remembering how walking worked. My hands froze near the zipper. I didn't touch it. The shadow leaned closer, not pressing, not forcing, just arriving at the boundary of my space. Then the fingers came, long, slow, pressing gently into the fabric as if testing whether I was real. The tent bent inward slightly, not tearing, not breaking, just acknowledging pressure it was never meant to hold. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The fingers stayed for a moment longer than comfort could measure, then withdrew, like curiosity satisfied. The footsteps resumed circling, but slower now, as if thinking. And then nothing, just rain, endless rain. Morning came pale and weak. The storm already gone, leaving the world soaked and trembling. I stepped outside slowly. The ground around the tent had changed. Mud disturbed in wide loops. Perfect circles of movement surrounding where I had slept. And in the deepest parts of the soil, prints. Too large, too deliberate, but no direction away. Only arrival, as if whatever had visited never needed to leave. We noticed the silence first, not the absence of sound, the absence of life. No birds, no insects, no wind moving through branches, just mountain air sitting too still against our skin. 3 of us had camped there, a ridge overlooking a valley swallowed in green and shadow. Everything looked normal, until we listened, or rather, realized nothing was listening back. That night, the fire burned low, small orange pulse in the center of too much darkness. Then the rocks started falling, not from above us, from deep within the trees. Thuds hitting ground, rolling, stopping, then more, one by one, like something unseen was throwing them just to measure distance. We didn't speak. We only watched the forest beyond the firelight, waiting for a mistake in movement. Then one of us stood up, said he heard something further down the slope. He walked toward it before anyone could stop him, and vanished into the dark between trees. No sound, no struggle, no echo, just absence. We waited. Minutes stretched too long. Then he returned, slowly, walking like the ground beneath him had changed its rules. His face was pale, not injured, not bleeding, just emptied of expression that made sense. He sat down without speaking, didn't look at us, didn't look at anything. We asked what he saw. He didn't answer, only stared into the fire like it might explain him back to himself. The rocks stopped falling after that. The forest didn't resume. It simply remained, still, like it had finished observing us. We left before sunrise. No one argued. No one looked back. The creek was narrow enough to step across in places, hidden deep between hills where the forest folded inward on itself. I set camp where the water bent around stones like it had learned patience. The night was quiet at first. Then the eyes appeared, amber light above the hillside. High, still, watching, not reflecting fire, not natural glow, just presence shaped into sight. I stood slowly. The water beside me barely moved. Even the creek seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. The eyes didn't blink, didn't shift, only held their position above me like judgment without voice. I waited for them to move. They didn't. Hours passed in uneven silence. Fire shrinking, shadow stretching. Still they remained. Then came the knocking. From the trees. Not all at once. One knock, then another farther away, then another answering it, tree to tree, hill to hill, like signals passing through unseen hands. I realized something slowly. The knocking wasn't random. It was structured, communicating. The eyes above the hill didn't move, because they didn't need to. Something else was already responding. Inside the forest, around me, I stepped back toward the fire. But even the flames felt smaller now, like they were being watched too. I woke before dawn, cold air pressing into my face like wet glass. Something was wrong immediately. My backpack was gone. Not tipped over, not dragged, gone. I searched the campsite first. Slow circles, careful steps. Nothing disturbed except a faint impression of movement near the edge of the clearing. Then I looked up. In the tree line, above the slope, it was there, my backpack, hanging impossibly high between branches that shouldn't have held anything that heavy. No rope, no straps visible from below, just suspended stillness. I climbed halfway up before stopping. Something about the placement felt intentional, like it wanted to be seen, not recovered. When I returned to the ground, I noticed the circles. Food wrappers arranged neatly around the campsite, not scattered, not dropped, placed, evenly spaced, like someone had measured distance without tools. I followed them slowly with my eyes, each one pointing outward, then inward again. A pattern, not random, not animal. The forest had been studied, or was studying me. Near the cliff edge, the prints appeared, large, deep, stopping suddenly at the drop. No return path, no continuation, just decision made at the edge of falling. I didn't retrieve my backpack. I didn't want to know why it was taken upward instead of away. The snowstorm hit without warning, wind tearing through the mountains like something searching for a place to settle. We saw the cabin just before visibility failed completely. Old structure beneath black pine trees, half buried in snow, still standing, barely. Inside, the air was colder than outside, dry with smell mixed with something older, something forgotten. But there was firewood already stacked near the hearth. Fresh, too fresh. We didn't ask why. We just needed shelter. Night came quickly, the storm pressing against every wall at once. Then the footsteps began outside, heavy, slow, walking through snow that should have muffled everything. But it didn't. Each step carried weight, like something far too large, had learned to move carefully. We checked the door once. Nothing there, but the prints were visible by morning light flashes, moving around the cabin, circling, returning, never leaving. Inside, the walls started to change. Scratches appeared after midnight, slow, long, dragging across with like something testing strength instead of breaking in. We stayed silent, listening instead of speaking. The cabin felt smaller by the hour, like the walls were leaning inward to hear better. At dawn, we opened the door. The storm had softened, and everything outside was marked. Gigantic footprints pressed into snow, stopping directly at the threshold, not entering, only waiting. We were filming wildlife that wasn't there. That's what it felt like. 3 of us standing in a clearing, cameras raised, pointing into a forest that refused to behave like one. No birds, no movement, only trees arranged like silent witnesses. Then the growl came, deep, not animal, in any way I understood. It rolled through the trunks like pressure, not sound. We turned slowly, scanning the edge of the trees. Nothing moved at first. Then the cameras began to fail. Screens flickering, focus drifting, static swallowing the edges of the frame. Every time the sound returned, the image broke apart, as if the forest rejected being recorded. One of us whispered that we should leave. No one disagreed, but we didn't move. Not yet, because in one frame, just one, something appeared, a shape between the trees, too tall to belong there. Still, perfectly still, facing us, or facing the cameras. It didn't step forward. It didn't retreat. It simply existed in a place where existence felt wrong. And then, gone. No movement. No transition. Just absence where something had been confirmed a moment before. The cameras worked again after that. But none of us trusted them anymore, because the forest no longer felt empty. only selective. The forest used to feel smaller when I was young, like it ended where my fear ended. Behind our house, it stretched only as far as curiosity would allow. But nights changed that. After midnight, rocks would hit the roof, not random, rhythmic, like something testing how long we would stay still. I remember lying awake, listening to each impact roll across the ceiling, counting them without wanting to. Sometimes I saw figures at the tree line during winter storms, tall shapes standing between snow and shadow, not moving even when the wind moved everything else. My parents said it was imagination. I learned not to argue. Years passed. The forest grew back into silence. Or so I thought. When I returned as an adult, the house looked unchanged. Same walls, same windows, same tired familiarity. But the feeling came back immediately. That quiet pressure behind the eyes. Like something remembering me before I remembered it. At night, I stood near the back door. The trees beyond were darker than memory. Not empty, just waiting. And somewhere deep inside them, the old rhythm began again. Not rocks this time, just silence arranged in the same pattern as before. We didn't know each other before that night. Just strangers drawn to the same remote campground. Firelight between us. Shadows leaning in. One by one, story started. Encounters in forests. Missing trails. Whistles in the dark. Footprints where there shouldn't be any. Each story sounded different, but the details kept repeating. Always the same silence. Always the same feeling of being followed. Without pursuit. I listened without speaking. Until I realized something. The sounds they described were already happening outside the camp. Whistles moving between trees. Soft, patient, matching exactly what had been said moments earlier. The fire dimmed slightly. Not from wind. From absence of attention. We all noticed at once. No one admitted it first. But our eyes kept drifting toward the dark edges of the forest. Listening became more important than speaking. Because the forest was no longer random. It was responsive. Something large moved just beyond the glow, not crossing into light, just staying close enough to confirm it was real. We stopped telling stories after that, because everything said aloud seemed to return, slightly closer than before. The RV was parked alone at the overlook, cliff edge on one side, endless dark forest on the other. We thought isolation meant safety. It didn't. At 2 a.m., the first knock came. Heavy, direct. The entire vehicle shook slightly. We checked outside immediately. Nothing there. Only windless night and still trees below the cliff. The second knock came from the roof. We didn't speak. We just listened, holding still inside the cramped space, surrounded by metal that suddenly felt thin. We checked again. Still nothing. But the roof had weight to it now, like something had settled above us and decided to stay. By morning, we saw the footprints. Circling the RV, deep impressions in dry dirt that hadn't moved in hours. No direction of arrival, no direction of departure, just orbit, as if something had spent the entire night learning our shape without entering it. I left the trail at dusk. That was the first mistake. The forest changed slowly at first, paths becoming uncertain, landmarks shifting slightly when I looked away. Not enough to notice immediately. Just enough to doubt myself later. Then came the footsteps. Behind me, not close, not far, just consistent, following without urgency. I walked faster. The forest responded by becoming quieter, branches bending occasionally to my sides like something passing through them without contact. I never saw it directly, only its influence, pressure in the air, movement without source. Hours passed like that. Distance stretching in strange ways. Sometimes the path felt longer when I rested, sometimes shorter when I ran. Nothing stayed consistent except the presence behind me, and yet it never closed the distance, just maintained it, as if matching me was more important than catching me. By dawn, the forest began to thin, shapes of civilization returning like a memory I hadn't fully lost. The footsteps faded before I reached the edge, not stopping. Just no longer needed. I didn't look back when I crossed into open ground, but I felt it remain there for a moment longer, watching the boundary I had just escaped, as if understanding I would return someday. The lake looked different at night, Not changed, not altered, just more aware. I arrived just before sunset, when the sky still held a thin strip of light that didn't want to leave. Water stretched wide and black between the trees, smooth enough to reflect the last glow like broken glass. I set camp near the shore where the ground was firm. Soft wind brushed through pine needles above me, but it never reached the water. That part stayed still, too still. The first night passed quietly, almost gently, until the splashing began. Not loud, not violent, just presence touching water where nothing should have been. Slow, deliberate, like something stepping in and out without urgency. I sat up inside the tent and listened. The lake answered nothing, only held the sound without reflection. When I stepped outside, the surface was calm again, perfect, undisturbed. But I knew I hadn't imagined it, because the air still carried the faint weight of movement. The second night felt colder, not in temperature, in intention. The forest around the lake grew quieter than before. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through. Then I saw it, shapes moving across the shoreline, under moonlight, large, low, not walking in any way I understood, sliding between shadow and reflection, like the ground didn't matter to them. Each movement was slow enough to make certainty difficult, but too deliberate to ignore. I stayed inside the tent longer than I should have, watching through thin fabric as the water shifted in patterns that didn't match wind or current. Something was close, closer than the lake should allow. The fishing gear outside began to disappear after that, not all at once, one item at a time, quietly removed from the dock. No splashes, no disturbance, just absence where objects had been moments before. I checked the shoreline early the next morning. Nothing returned, only damp wood and faint impressions near the edge. Not footprints exactly, more like pressure marks, as if something had paused there, considering. The third night never fully arrived in my memory. It felt like a continuation of waiting rather than time passing. I sat near the fire, but the fire no longer felt like protection, only light, and light meant visibility for both sides. That was when I saw it clearly. At dawn, a massive figure crouched beside the water, still too large to fit comfortably in human understanding of proportion. Its shape blurred slightly where it touched the reflection, as if the lake refused to fully contain it. It didn't move when I looked at it. It didn't react. It simply existed near the shore like it had always been there, long before I arrived. I didn't approach. I didn't run. There was no instruction inside me that felt correct anymore, only observation. After a long moment, it shifted, not toward me, not away, just downward, into the water, without resistance. No splash followed, no ripple spread outward. The lake accepted it without argument, and then it was gone. I stood there for a long time after that, waiting for something to confirm it had happened, but nothing did. The water returned to stillness. The forest resumed its quiet breathing. Even the air felt uncertain about what it had just witnessed. When I finally packed my gear, I didn't look back at the shore, not because I was afraid of what remained there, but because I wasn't sure anything had ever left it. The campsite was already set when I arrived. Small clearing, thin trees, air too still to feel natural. I placed the recording devices carefully around the perimeter, one near the fire ring, one at the tree line, one deeper in the brush where light barely reached. Everything was designed to capture what human attention usually missed. Night fell without ceremony. No wind, no insects, no distant animal calls. Only the soft pulse of my own movement inside the silence. I checked the devices once before sleeping. Green light steady, recording active. Then I laid down and let the forest take over the edges of awareness. The first unusual sound appeared just after midnight. Clicking, slow, irregular, moving between the trees like something tapping its way forward without light. The recorder near the brush picked it up clearly, too clearly, as if it was close enough to distort expectation. I didn't hear it directly, not at first. That was the strange part. The forest outside remained silent while the recording filled with movement. Then came the distant calls. Not animal, not bird, something layered, almost structured, like signals exchanged across distance without language. The microphones caught everything, but my ears caught nothing. At some point, I stepped outside the tent. The night air felt thicker than before, not heavier in weight, heavier in attention. The clicking continued in the recordings, faster now, closer, but the forest still showed no sign of disturbance. That's when the breathing started. Inside the audio feed, low, close, slow enough to feel intentional. It stayed steady for minutes. No variation, no urgency, just presence, surrounding the microphone like it had learned what being recorded meant. I checked the area immediately after. Nothing there. No footprints. No broken branches. Only the devices, blinking quietly into empty dark. By morning, the recordings were still running. That was the first unsettling part. They should have stopped hours ago. Battery logs confirmed they hadn't been touched, but the files told a different story. Extended silence broken only by breathing, and at the very end, a shift in sound, like something leaning in, not toward the forest, toward the recorder itself. Close enough that distance stopped meaning anything. I played it back once. Only once, because in that final moment, just before the file ended, there was a faint distortion, not noise, recognition, as if whatever had been outside the tent had realized it had been heard. We placed the cameras just before dusk. Hunter's gear, carefully strapped to trees across a wide, quiet valley. Each lens pointed into space that looked harmless at first glance. Pine slopes, broken light, slow-moving fog resting between trunks. By nightfall, everything was set, and everything felt watched. The first hours showed nothing unusual. Empty forest, still air, occasional movement from small animals at the edges of frame. Normal, predictable, almost comforting. Then the fog changed. It didn't just move. It thickened in places where nothing should have disturbed it, like pressure was passing through unseen corridors between trees. One camera near the lower ridge captured it first. A shape, too large to be mistaken for anything familiar, standing at the edge of visibility, facing the lens directly, not moving, not scanning. Focus, as if it already knew it was being observed. The image held for only a moment, then distortion swallowed it. The camera continued recording empty forest immediately after, but something had changed, not in the footage, in the system itself. Because after that moment, every camera began behaving differently. Angles shifted slightly overnight, not enough to prove tampering, just enough to feel intentional, like something was learning where it could be seen. We checked the feeds repeatedly, always the same result. Forest, fog, silence, except for the gaps. Those brief moments where the feeds stuttered, and the forest felt aware. By the third night, several cameras went dark, not all at once, one by one, each failure preceded by a moment of static that sounded almost like movement. The remaining feeds showed something worse. The figure returned, closer each time, no longer at the edges, now within the valley itself, standing where no trail should have led, and always facing the cameras, as if counting them. The last working camera captured it just before dawn. The figure filled the frame completely, too close for depth to matter. And in that final image, just before the feed cut, it didn't move away. It leaned slightly forward, as if acknowledging the lens, and everything behind it. When we returned to retrieve the equipment, the valley was quiet again, too quiet. Some cameras were missing entirely, others buried beneath soil that hadn't been disturbed before our arrival, not broken, not scattered, placed as if something had decided what should remain and what should be taken away. The night felt closer than usual, not darker, not colder, closer, like the forest had leaned inward around our campsite, tightening the space between trees and fabric. We were already inside the tent when the voices began. At first, it sounded like distant calling, faint, familiar, almost harmless. Then one of them said my name, clear enough to recognize, too clear for comfort. I froze without realizing it. The air inside the tent felt suddenly thin, like breathing had become a decision instead of instinct. Outside, the forest remained still, No wind, no movement, just waiting silence stretched across the trees. Then another voice answered. Not mine this time. My friend's name. Same tone, same cadence. But something about it felt slightly off, like memory trying to imitate itself and missing by a fraction. We didn't respond. Neither of us did. The voices kept circling, not in chaos, in pattern, one after another, calling names we both recognized, each one arriving from a different direction, never overlapping, always waiting their turn. The tent walls pressed softly against shifting air. Or maybe it was just perception. It was hard to tell anymore. We sat in silence, backs against packs, listening instead of speaking, because speaking felt like confirmation, and confirmation felt dangerous. The footsteps came next, slow, measuring the ground outside and wide, patient loops, not approaching, not leaving, maintaining distance, as if distance itself mattered more than contact. The voices never stopped. They grew softer instead, closer in meaning, not volume, like they no longer needed to be loud to be understood. At some point, one of the voices laughed, quietly, almost gently, and that was worse than anything before it. We waited until morning without moving, without unzipping the tent, without acknowledging anything except the thin boundary between inside and outside. When daylight finally arrived, the forest looked unchanged, almost peaceful, but the ground around us told a different story. Giant footprints surrounded the campsite, pressed deep into wet earth that hadn't been wet the night before, forming a full circle, complete, intentional, as if everything we had heard had never been outside at all, only around us. The fire tower stood alone above the forest, old metal structure, rusted stairs, a single narrow room at the top overlooking endless trees. I reached it just before sunset. The wind was gone by the time I climbed the last step. Even the forest below felt distant, like it had lowered its voice to match the height. Inside the tower, the air smelled like dry dust and old wood, but there was fresh firewood stacked neatly in the corner. Too fresh, too deliberate. I didn't touch it at first. I just listened. The world outside faded quickly into darkness. Night arrived without resistance, and with it, the silence deepened. Then the movements began below. Heavy, slow, footsteps climbing the staircase, each step echoing upward through hollow metal. Deliberate enough to be certain, but never rushing. I checked the trapdoor once. Nothing there, only darkness beneath the platform. The footsteps continued anyway, closer now, pausing just outside the final threshold, as if waiting for permission that would never come. I didn't speak, didn't move. Even breathing felt like it might be noticed. Hours passed like that, staircase silent, then active again, then silent once more, always returning, never entering. The tower began to feel smaller as the night stretched on, not physically, emotionally, like the walls were closing in through awareness alone. At one point, something touched the underside of the floor, a slow drag across metal. Testing, measuring. The sound stopped, just sure breaking anything open. Morning arrived without warning. No gradual lightening, just sudden pale clarity. The stairs were empty, no movement, no trace of passage. But the windows told a different truth. Huge handprints covered the dusty glass, pressed from outside, too large for structure, too precise for accident, and all facing inward, as if whatever had been below all night had finally found something worth looking at. We woke to the sound before we understood it. Not wind, not storm, something deeper, like the forest itself was shifting its weight in slow disbelief. The trees were shaking, not bending, not swaying, shaking, entire trunks trembling as if something unseen was moving through their roots. The air felt tight, held between moments that didn't want to align. No birds reacted, no insects rose. Even the usual life of the forest seemed paused in uncertainty. We stepped outside slowly. The ground was steady beneath us, but everything above it wasn't. Branches rattled without wind. Leaves quivered in silence. And somewhere deep in the valley, a cracking sound rolled through the trees. Slow, heavy, distant, like something large shifting position after a long sleep. We didn't speak at first. There was nothing to say that the forest didn't already answer in its own language. Then it happened again. A stronger tremor through the canopy, this time closer, more deliberate, as if whatever cause it was moving toward us, testing the forest for resistance. One of us pointed toward the tree lean. His hand didn't shake. Only the air around it did. Between the trunks, something moved. Not clearly, not fully formed. Just a distortion of space where the trees failed to align correctly. Tall, too tall to fit between what the forest should allow. It didn't step forward into view. It didn't need to. Its presence alone made the trees react, trembling like they were remembering something they had been trying to forget. We backed away from the fire, without meaning to. Even the flames felt smaller now, as if they had lost confidence in their ability to protect anything. Another crack echoed through the valley, closer this time. We didn't wait to understand it further. No discussion, no hesitation, just movement, gathering what we could without looking too long at anything that might already be aware of us. The forest did not stop us. It simply watched us leave again. But this time, it felt less like escape, and more like being allowed to go. We found the cave by accident, a narrow break in a rock high above the forest line, hidden where the ridge bent away from the sun. The air changed before we even stepped inside. Cold, heavy, old in a way that felt physical, like the mountain had been holding its breath for a long time. Our footsteps echoed too loudly in the entrance. Each sound felt multiplied, returning from deeper inside before it should have reached anything. We moved slowly, flashlight beams cutting through darkness that didn't behave like normal space. The stone walls were marked, deep claw-like scratches running in uneven patterns. Not random, repetitive, as if something had been pacing the same thoughts into the rock for years. Then we saw the bones, piled in corners where light struggled to reach. Not scattered, not natural, arranged in shapes that didn't suggest death, but placement, too deliberate for chance. A smell followed us deeper. Sharp, rotting, ancient. It clung to the air like something invisible had been sealed inside the cave and never allowed to leave. We should have turned back immediately. But curiosity is a way of sounding like silence when fear is already present. So we went deeper, and the cave answered, with breathing, not ours, something slow and patient. Far ahead in the dark where light failed to reach properly, we stopped at once. Every sound we made seemed to return slightly altered, as if the cave was repeating us with delay. The breathing grew steadier, closer without distance changing. Then footsteps, heavy, not echoing from behind us, from inside the stone itself. We didn't wait to confirm what was real. We ran. The cave narrowed as we retreated, twisting the light into unstable shapes. Every turn felt like it led back toward the same darkness. The footsteps followed without urgency, not chasing, accompanying, as if escape had never been part of the design. We broke into open air only when the ridge finally gave way behind us. Falling light, cold wind, familiar forest below, but even outside, the silence had changed. It no longer felt like absence. It felt remembered. And deep behind us, inside the mountain, something continued breathing, as if it had simply paused while we visited. The campground was already fading from records when I arrived, a place marked in fading ink, scheduled for closure, as if even maps had begun to forget it. The road ended early. After that, only gravel, then dirt, then nothing that felt maintained by anything living. The air grew colder the deeper I went in. Not temperature alone. Expectation. There was only one other occupied site when I arrived. A single tent. No fire. No movement. Just presence behind fabric. I didn't approach. Something about it felt like interrupting a thought that had already been finished. Night settled fast. Too fast for comfort. The mountains around us swallowed the remaining light until only a thin pale outline remained above the trees. Then the screaming began, distant at first, echoing through the valleys like something breaking apart slowly instead of suddenly, not human in rhythm, but close enough in tone to disturb recognition. I stepped outside. The other campsite remained still. No light, no movement, The scream came again, closer this time, moving across distance without passing through it properly, like the mountains were repeating it rather than carrying it. I looked toward the neighboring tent once more. Something felt wrong about its stillness, not abandonment, removal, as if whatever had been there had been taken, without disturbing the shape it left behind. I didn't sleep, not even attempted rest, just sitting near the edge of my sight, listening to the dark breathe in uneven intervals. At some point, the screaming stopped, not gradually, just absence, the kind that leaves after something has been fully understood. Morning arrived pale and uncertain. The neighboring campsite was empty, completely, no sign of packing, no disturbance, just smooth ground where presence had been hours before. I walked over slowly. The air felt heavier there, like it still remembered sound that had already ended. And beyond the clearing, leading into the fog-covered forest, there were footprints, gigantic, pressing deep into soil that should not have held shape. So clearly, they didn't wander. They chose direction, and they did not return. The forest beyond them remained still, not empty, waiting, as if it had already decided what came next, and no longer needed to watch us for it. The canoe slipped into water that felt older than it looked. No current, no ripple beyond our passage. Just a long, slow surface stretching between tree-lined banks that seemed to lean inward as we moved deeper. The river narrowed, then widened again, like it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to hold. Every sound we made disappeared too quickly. Paddles entering water, wood creaking, breathing, all of it swallowed before it could become echo. And then we noticed the silence wasn't normal. It wasn't empty. It was complete. No birds, no insects, no distant forest movement. Even the wind felt absent, as if the air had been carefully removed from the space above the water. We kept paddling. Slow, careful, like speed might disturb something that was already aware of us. The first footprints appeared the next morning, pressed into the muddy riverbanks. Too large for anything we had words for. They didn't lead away. They simply existed along the edge, as if something had walked there while the river refused to acknowledge it. We checked the waterline every night after that, and every morning more marks appeared, always in different places, always the same shape, like repetition without purpose or purpose beyond understanding. One evening we saw it, across the river, a tall figure standing at the edge of the opposite bank. Still, perfectly still, not facing us directly, yet aware in a way that didn't require direction. The water between us remained untouched. Not even wind disturbed it. We didn't speak. There was nothing to add to what silence had already made clear. Night after night it returned, always the same position, always the same distance. Never crossing, never leaving, just observing from across a boundary that neither side seemed willing or able to break. Eventually, I realized something I didn't want to accept. It wasn't watching the river. It was watching the separation itself, as if the boundary mattered more than what existed on either side of it. And I began to understand why it never crossed. Not because it couldn't, but because it didn't need to. The river wasn't keeping us safe. It was keeping something contained. And we had simply been drifting inside its observation zone the entire time. When we finally turned the canoe back, nothing followed. Nothing rushed. Nothing changed. The silence remained intact behind us, as if it had always expected that decision, and was already waiting for the next arrival instead. I shouldn't have come back, but the forest doesn't fade the way memory does. It waits. Even years later, the road still ended too soon, as if time itself refused to extend that far. I walked the remaining distance alone. No gear beyond what I could carry. No reason beyond what I couldn't explain. The trees felt familiar immediately, not in comfort, in recognition, like something old had noticed me returning before I even arrived. The abandoned campsite was still there, almost unchanged, fire ring intact, ground flattened by past presence that never fully left. The air was colder than I remembered, not temperature, memory. I stood there for a long time without moving, waiting for something to feel different. It didn't. Then the whistles returned, soft at first, distant between the trees like breath moving through hollow space. But I knew the pattern instantly. The same rhythm, the same directionless approach. Not new, remembered. I didn't light a fire right away. I waited instead, listening to the forest rebuild itself around the sound. The silence between whistles felt heavier now, like it had learned my patience. Night settled slowly, too slowly, as if the forest wanted to watch me notice every step of darkness arriving. And then I saw it, between the trees, the same towering figure, closer than before, not moving, not approaching, just present in a way that made distance irrelevant. The fire I had finally lit flickered once, as if acknowledging it. I didn't run. There was no instinct left for that, only recognition. The figure stayed where it was, half within shadow, half within something that didn't behave like shadow at all. It felt less like an intruder now, and more like something continuing a pause thought. As the night deepened, I realized something unsettling. It wasn't watching me the way I used to think. It was remembering me, like I was part of a cycle it had already completed once before. The fire weakened, ash settling into soft collapse, and the forest grew quieter than any silence I had known before. Not empty, final. The figure remained at the tree line until the last ember died, and when there was no light left to define distance or shape, it didn't disappear. It simply became part of the forest again, as if it had never needed to leave at all. I left before sunrise, walked without turning back even once, but I could still feel the presence behind the trees. Not following, not waiting, just continuing. And I understood then that I was never really leaving the forest, only stepping out long enough to forget it was still there, breathing quietly until the next return. And somewhere beyond the rain-streaked windows, I began to feel that Black Hollow was not a place the bus was traveling toward. It was a place it could never leave. I left the bus at dawn. The storm followed. As always, rain whispered through the trees while fog drifted across the forest floor. The road disappeared sometime, before evening. Soon I found myself wandering through unfamiliar woods. Every direction looked the same. Every path vanished beneath mud and roots. Night approached quickly. That was when I saw a faint light. A cabin, hidden among the trees. Warm yellow light glowed behind its windows. Relief washed through me, until I heard a voice. My name, softly spoken from inside. The cabin door had not even opened yet. Still, the voice knew my name. I stood frozen in the rain. Then the voice repeated it. Gentle, patient, waiting. Eventually I stepped inside. The air smelled of old wood and fireplace smoke. Photographs covered the walls. Dozens of them. Strangers standing inside the same room. Different decades, different clothing. Yet the room never changed. Each photograph showed the exact cabin around me. Every face appeared uneasy, as though each person had arrived unexpectedly. The ticking of clocks filled the silence. I looked around. Clocks covered nearly every shelf and wall, but none agreed. Some moved quickly, others barely advanced. One clock ticked backward. The uneven rhythm created a strange pulse throughout the cabin. The voice returned, this time from beneath the floorboards. My name again, whispered from below. Slow, calm, almost affectionate. I knelt beside the floor. The wood felt cold beneath my hand. The whisper continued, just beneath the boards, close enough to feel. Far too close. Outside, something moved. Heavy footsteps circled the cabin. The ground trembled slightly. I looked through the window. Enormous footprints surrounded the building. Fresh impressions pressed deep into the mud. One complete circle. Then another. Then another. Whatever had made them was still walking. Still circling. The voice beneath the floor continued calling my name. The clocks continued ticking at different speeds. And deep down, I understood something that filled me with quiet dread. The cabin had been waiting for me, just as it had waited for everyone in those photographs. The forest eventually opened into a forgotten town. Most buildings stood empty, windows broken, paint peeling from weathered walls. A rusted water tower rose above everything else. Its silhouette vanished into low clouds. Rain drifted steadily through the darkness. As I crossed the town square, lightning flashed. A figure stood atop the water tower, watching, The distance made details impossible to see, yet something about its shape felt deeply wrong. Another flash illuminated the tower. Long limbs wrapped around the metal framework, arms and legs stretched impossibly far. The creature clung to the structure like an enormous spider. Then darkness returned. Thunder rolled overhead. When the next flash came, the figure was gone. The top of the tower stood empty. I searched the streets, the rooftops, the alleys. Nothing. No movement. No sign of where it had gone. Later, I found an elderly resident sitting beneath a covered porch. Rainwater dripped from the roof beside him. His eyes remained fixed on the tower. When I asked about it, his expression darkened. "Don't stay after midnight." That was all he said. Nothing more. Night settled across the town. The streets emptied completely. Fog drifted between abandoned buildings. At exactly 4 a.m, tapping began overhead. Tap, 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 slow, measured, moving across the roof above me. The same careful rhythm I remembered from the car long ago. I remained perfectly still, listening. The tapping continued, crossing from one end of the roof to the other, heavy enough to bend old wood slightly. Yet whatever walked above never revealed itself. Dawn eventually arrived. The tapping stopped. The tower remained visible through the mist, silent, watching. And every time I looked toward its rusted silhouette, I felt certain that something high above was still looking back. The road vanished completely after the forgotten town. Only forest remained, miles upon miles of rain-soaked wilderness. The storm had become part of the landscape, a permanent presence. The trees stood taller here, older, their roots twisted through black mud like veins beneath skin. Night arrived before I found shelter. I sat beneath a rocky overhang and listened to the rain. At first, everything seemed normal. Then the forest inhaled. The movement was subtle, almost impossible to notice. Branches shifted together. Leaves trembled. The ground seemed to rise slightly. Then came the exhale, a slow release. The entire forest moved as one. My breath caught. The motion repeated. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The trees were breathing. A deep vibration traveled through the soil. Roots shifted beneath the mud, not growing, moving, like living muscles beneath skin. The earth rippled gently around them. The sight filled me with cold awe. Rainwater flowed through shallow channels that now resembled veins. The entire forest appeared connected, alive, a colossal organism stretching far beyond the horizon. Then something moved beneath the ground. Far below, massive, ancient, the motion rolled beneath the forest like a whale beneath dark water. Trees swayed. Mud trembled. Roots shifted around me. The scale of it defied understanding. Whatever existed beneath the earth was larger than any creature I could imagine, larger than mountains, larger than the roads themselves. The realization arrived slowly. Every strange place, every abandoned road, every impossible encounter, they all belonged here, inside something living, something old beyond measure. The forest breathed again. The ground rose gently beneath me. For the first time, I stopped searching for explanations. I simply listened. Rain, breath, roots, and the slow heartbeat of something vast sleeping beneath the world. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Time no longer felt reliable beneath the endless storm. The highway eventually returned. A single road cutting through fog and darkness. I followed it without question, without destination, without hope of finding anything familiar. Then one evening, the road ended. Abruptly, a cliff overlooked a vast expanse of black water. The sea stretched endlessly beneath gray skies. No map had ever shown this place. No signs marked its existence. Only silence, only rain. Broken vehicles littered the shoreline far below. Cars, trucks, buses,